A COVID cartel? Maybe. Today, Dr. Sabine Hazan comes on after testifying in front of Congress to talk about the ways in which federal health agencies, big tech, big pharma, and legacy media are arguably hiding valuable medical research, having done over 300 clinical trials with 30 years doing research for big pharma. Her research was silenced during the pandemic, and it could have saved lives. Stick around and find out what happened.
Keeping It Real with Jillian Michaels.
Dr. Hazen, finally we meet in person. Welcome to the show.
Thank you.
Oh
Thank
my
you for
gosh.
having me. Thank you.
We're gonna jump into some really serious stuff today. So I need you to do yourself justice here. When I drop your name to pretty much every doctor that I interview, work with, speak to, they're like, oh, Dr. Hazen, she's the best. She's
Thank
the
you.
OG. She's a genius. She's the best. We're going to
You're
talk
too
about
kind.
some, but unfortunately I'm not. And we're going to talk, as I mentioned, about some serious stuff. And I need you to establish that this is not tin hat, down the rabbit hole, crazy, nothing political going on here, so that we can best educate people without bias. Tell me about yourself, your credentials, and what you do, please, doctor.
So I'm a gastroenterologist by trade. I've been doing clinical trials for 30 years for pharmaceutical companies. Clinical trials for pharmaceutical companies brought me to the path of the microbiome because pharmaceutical companies are starting with microbiome products. And when I saw that, I said, well, obviously there's something there, but we just don't understand it. So why don't I start my lab to understand the microbiome? And then because I was in the clinical trial world with pharmaceutical companies, I decided, well, I'm going to write protocols to look. So I wrote 57 protocols, submitted them on clinicaltrials.gov, and then started little by little doing, clinical trials on the microbiome and disease.
Doc, can you explain what you mean when you say you wrote protocols? What does that mean for somebody?
So when you are thinking of doing research, you have to write a protocol on how you're doing research. So for example, I want to study a new product for diabetes. I need to write my protocol to say, okay, well, this is what I'm going to give diabetic patients, and this is how I'm going to follow them. And then I'm going to have endpoints, right? Of how am I going to show that the diabetes is working, right? So you have to start writing the protocol. It's kind of like a screenplay, right? It's like a movie, a screenplay. And then you have to have the screenplay first before you have the movie. So it's the same thing. A protocol is basically what tells us how do we collect the stools to make sure that everybody has the same collection? How do we standardize looking at the analysis of the stools? How do we standardize the methods of processing?
Bottom line is, you have set the standards for the entire industry in this space.
I'm trying to at least get us there to look at it.
Well,
because
57 protocols, I mean,
there's
so arguably, you're the...
I know my microbiome for as much as most people because I am doing the testing. So I can see what Parkinson's looks like. I can see what Alzheimer's looks like, autism.
In microbiome.
In the microbiome, but it's very beginning because we are at the beginning of the research on the microbiome. So, and that's something that I want to emphasize because what I'm seeing is just the surface. We need to kind of, do more samples, analyze more, see more. But right now, the surface, there's something there. There's definitely something there. And I think, the world is interested because they know deep down there's something. It's like your gut feeling almost.
It's funny because you undersell it, whereas I could sit here with Dr. William Lee, angiogenesis guy, cancer researcher, Dr. Casey Means, head and neck surgeon turned metabolic disease specialist, Dr. Drew, and each and every one will reference the microbiome's connection to their field of medicine. And years ago, you and I first spoke before COVID happened.
Right.
Then we spoke during COVID. And I remember asking you, I was like, Doc, these asymptomatic cases, could this have something to do with the microbiome? And you had said to me, Jill, I'm working on that.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So I want to first, let's think about that for a second. I want to talk about credentials check. What is microbiome? What aspects of our health does it impact? Pretty much check, in particular with regard to immunity and pathogens like COVID. What role might the microbiome play in the severity of our illness, potentially being asymptomatic, and so on?
So we were the first lab, as you know, that found COVID in the stools. So when COVID hit, I put my hurricane mode, and that's the best way to describe me, into motion, because I felt, well, they're pushing one narrative, which is the vaccine, but there's got to be a treatment to this. And so I connected with Dr. Tom Barodi, who is the father of fecal transplant. Fecal transplant is a procedure where we take stools from a healthy donor, put them in an unhealthy, and then fix the disease, right? The condition which causes diarrhea in a lot of patients. So when I called Dr. Barodi, I said, okay, I have a genetic sequencing lab that I'm starting to look at the microbiome. You've put in a bunch of patents in medicine and for treatment and have worked with a lot of pharmaceutical companies. Surely we can figure out how to get out of COVID, the two of us. Because really, I'm the type of person that always likes to verify what others are telling me. Just because the government is telling me to do one thing doesn't mean I'm going to trust the government, right? Because I'm in a position where I've been doing clinical trials for pharma for 30 years. Dr. Barodi has been innovating treatment in gastroenterology, and a lot of doctors are following Dr. Barodi. So when you look at us two together, we said, well, why don't we look at the data? Why don't we look at what's being done in Italy? Why don't we look at what's being done in France? Why don't we look at what's being done in China? Make phone calls. And that's what I did. I made phone calls with clinical trial doctors like me that are on the front line, like doctors in Italy. What's working in Italy? Vitamin C was working in Italy. Why are we not pushing vitamin C? And I know I've had colds, I've survived colds. Vitamin C was always my go-to, right? Then vitamin D was working in another country. So vitamin C and vitamin D were the beginning for me. I wonder if that's boosting the microbiome, right? And
What's the mechanism by which those vitamins would be having an impact?
Right. And then people were talking about zinc. And then Dr. Raoul in France was talking about hydroxy, Z-Pak. And it makes, in my mind, it was maybe hydroxychloroquine is important at killing the virus in those people that don't have the strength in their microbiome. That's how my mind was working, right? I was trying to figure it out. So at the beginning, the first thing that came to my mind is everything ends up in the colon because I'm looking at the microbiome, right? I'm looking at the microbiome in anxious patients, in old people, young people. What's in the microbiome of those two populations that is different? The first thing my first thought was, I bet you COVID is in the stools. Let me look for COVID in the stools. So I switched gears from like my 57 clinical trials with Crohn's and all sort of colitis. I drove my scientists crazy. And I said, we're switching gear. We're writing a new pipeline because that's expensive. When you start thinking of, we were doing this microbiome analysis, which we validated. And here we are switching gear to let's look for this virus that nobody has seen before.
Right.
And so you have to remove the bacteria, remove the fungi, and focus just on the viruses and then zone in to COVID. So my scientist said, because these pipelines are not cheap, it was $125,000. So you're in the middle of a pandemic, the world has gone mad, and I'm here. Do I spend the money on looking for COVID, not knowing whether it's going to be there?
But if it is there, what does it mean? Just so people understand why you're looking for it in the stool.
Yes. So if it is there, it was going to tell me what is it doing to the microbiome.
Right. That's why you're looking for it. Got it.
Yes. Because it's a microbe. In the microbiome, in the gut, it's bacteria versus viruses. Bacteria is 20 times bigger than a virus. So you can imagine that you need a strong bacteria to fight off a virus, right? But you need to find the virus first.
Got it.
And here's why you need to find the virus. I cannot give a treatment if I don't see the virus because I'm not going to see what treatment removed the virus.
I see.
So we were supposed to all meet March 2020 at the Malibu microbiome meeting. When COVID hit, we were stuck. So the first thing I said to Scott Jackson at the National Institute of Standards is I said, there's a small study from China that found COVID by PCR, by small piece of the virus in the stools. I said, I bet you I can find it whole genome. So I started doing my pipeline. He started doing his work with the National Institute of Standards. That's why they started looking at the septic tanks. And in the meantime, my scientist says to me, he does the experiment, we spend the money, and he goes, you're not going to find anything with this pipeline. I go, okay, well, if we don't look, we're not going to find. So he calls me the day after the results and he goes, guess how many samples have COVID in their stools that were positive nasal swab PCR? I go, I don't know, 20%? He goes, all of them. And that's when I said, whoa. I go, are you sure you didn't make a mistake? You didn't contaminate? He goes, no. It matches the control from ATCC. So there's a lab in America that basically sells these controls of microbes, okay? So if your patient matches, because we're in the genetic world now, right? This is genetic sequencing. In other
Meaning
words,
the genetics of the virus.
Correct.
You're finding the entire sequence of the virus
sequence
in stool.
Yes.
And this allows you, the importance of this is to cure the disease, fix the problem.
Fix the problem.
Without taking a sledgehammer to the body like
Correct.
chemo to cancer. How can we do this in a way where the body is
Correct.
supporting its own immunity?
So the beginning was find COVID in the stools. And the first thing we noticed is every family that we tested had the same virus strain. However, when you compared the family in Atlanta to the family in Beverly Hills who had COVID, different strain of the virus. And right away, I said to myself, if there's different strains of the virus, how does a vaccine work? Even if the vaccine is at the spike protein, right? Because let's go back and explain this simply to people that are listening. A vaccine, you have to match. If your sequence is ABC, your vaccine has to be ABC. If your sequence is AFG, AFG is the vaccine. Now, if the sequence changes from ABC, but your vaccine is ABC, and now you have AWX, well, ABC is not going to work. You understand? It has to match to recognize the microbe so that it creates an immunity. So if it doesn't match because the virus
just mentally
is
connected
mutating.
all the dots.
Yes.
And to be honest, Dr. Hazen, I wasn't expecting to understand what you just said. And for months, and I'm not drawing any conclusions here, but for months you've seen the headlines.
Yes.
This didn't do anything. I got a vaccine injury. It messed me up. And I just kind of, I don't understand it. I'm certainly not going to make a statement. I'm staying out of this argument. And now for the first time, I'm understanding how much of this vaccination would have been ineffective, do you think then? Based on the first shot.
Well, I don't know because I'm kind of there's so much that has happened since the beginning. From uncovering the lies to uncovering the corruption, the censorship. It's so hard to trust, and that's the problem. Now I just saw a paper that said, well, the vaccine decreased mortality, and I can't even trust that paper. Why? Because my own hypothesis that I wrote on ivermectin was retracted. When a hypothesis on ivermectin is retracted, you cannot make a hypothesis. You can't trust science. That means somebody paid for that hypothesis to be retracted.
Okay, stop. You've jumped 10 steps ahead of our movie right now. You're in Act 3.
Sorry.
So don't hold on.
Sorry.
So hold on. I want to talk about, which brings me to this question. How difficult is it to conduct research and publish when the research goes against the national public health narrative?
Well, that's it.
Check.
Yeah.
So explain to me what happened here. You talked about how you would always advertise on social media for people to participate in clinical trials.
Correct.
And that's normal.
Right.
People do it all the time. I've seen it whenever, and they put the thing up on social media for X amount of participants, blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
Can you explain how that goes and what happened when you did that?
Yes. So in clinical trials, when you're about to do a clinical trial, you want to put the word out, right? In other words, I'm doing a study on psoriasis, and is the psoriasis, how to contact us to enter the study. So what we did is we would put an ad that was approved by the regulatory board.
Normal,
Standard clinical trial practice. So we submitted the ad for COVID. Have COVID, contact Ventura Clinical Trials, Progenibiome. We will treat you. We will, go through the protocol. Our protocols were approved by the FDA to be run as protocols, okay? So once our protocols on treatment on the most controversial protocols, hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D, and zinc, as a treatment was my protocol. And then the second one was hydroxychloroquine as a prophylaxis, 2 pills with vitamin C, D, and zinc as a prophylaxis.
Prophylaxis, prevention.
Exposed. Yeah.
If I was at a dinner party and I found out that person had COVID, jump on this to keep it from grabbing.
And if you felt like, you know what, your gut is not going to sustain you. In other words, you're eating horrible food, you're overweight, you're diabetic, you've got all these high risk, then that was my perfect population. Take 1 pill of hydroxychloroquine, take a bunch of vitamins for a month. Simple. Why? Because I felt that hydroxychloroquine, it changes the pH of the cell. What is the first thing the virus does? Is it latches to the ACE2 receptors and then enters the cell. If the pH of the cell is alkaline, it gets killed. So if you can neutralize it right off the bat, from the beginning in those people that don't have an immunity, then that was the hypothesis behind it, right? So those 2 protocols we did, and then we did ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc, vitamin C, D, and zinc, okay? So those 3 protocols we were advertising, like I would advertise anything. And what happened was we got censored. Facebook said, sorry, you're blacklisted. You can no longer advertise. Instagram could not advertise. We could not even, anything we tried to post. Now, remember, I did advertisement before, like psoriasis studies. I would basically advertise, you have psoriasis, come to my clinic, right?
Protocols FDA approved.
Yeah.
Looking to test to see if this actually works.
What happened with
side
COVID,
effects of these drugs?
Yeah.
Low profile side effects.
Yeah. Yeah. And these drugs were old. They were very safe, in my opinion. Ivermectin, we gave it to babies with scabies. I mean, I'm giving a drug that's given, it was a combination of drugs, ivermectin, doxycycline, zinc. Ivermectin is given to babies with scabies, and doxycycline is given to young kids with acne for a year almost, okay? All of a sudden, that's dangerous. All of a sudden, like, I can't advertise to put these patients. And here's the crazy thing. We had people call my office when we started the hydroxychloroquine protocol, calling us murderers. We were like, I'm on the front line trying to save people. I don't even have a mask, right? I'm exposed to people, all day long. I don't have a mask because I didn't want to spend $20 every time. Masks at the beginning were very expensive.
That's right.
It was like $20 a mask.
You couldn't get a hold of them.
You couldn't get them. Yeah. And then it was like, I'm not spending $20 every time I throw a mask and put it on. And then what about my hands touching the mask? And what about, the virus going into my eyes, on my skin?
The eyes.
That whole thing just didn't make sense at all. And then, so to me, when it stops making sense, I just stop listening and then I go on my own path. And so when we couldn't advertise on Facebook and Instagram, I knew there was something. I knew this was bigger than pharma. I knew this was bigger than health. And then when we couldn't talk about vitamin C and vitamin D and zinc, you couldn't even say to people, well, take vitamin C, take vitamin D. There was so many studies on vitamin D, and we couldn't even discuss it. So yeah, censorship happened. And so that censorship made me kind of double up on my work because I said, there's something else going on here.
Right. Guys, how often do you buy skincare products because they're labeled as clean or organic, paraben-free, only to find out that there are 100 other toxic ingredients in them that are damaging your skin, your body, your health? And why is it so hard to find skincare products that are truly USDA certified organic? Well, you know what? The search is over, okay? Purity Woods has you covered. I love these products. They smell amazing. My skin looks great. They're easy to travel with. And you don't have to worry and read every single thing on the label because you have an umbrella of wellness. You're covered. All organic, all clean. Purity Wood's mission is to provide people with the cleanest, most effective, healthy aging and longevity products available. All of their products are USDA certified organic, non-GMO, free of anything artificial, free of toxic preservatives and synthetic additives like pesticides, chemical fertilizers, dyes, parabens, and of course, it's cruelty-free, never tested on animals. So guys, turn back time on the appearance of your skin with Purity Wood's age-defying Dream Cream. Purity Woods is currently offering 17% off site-wide, but we get an additional 10% discount for our listeners for a total savings of 27%. Just go to puritywoods.com/Jillian or enter Jillian at checkout. So for an additional 10% off your first order, that's puritywoods.com, puritywoods.com. Enter the code Jillian for a total of 27% off your first order.
So my mind goes off, right? Because once you lose trust, you start questioning everything, right? And that's what happened to me. When I couldn't advertise for my protocols, when I used to do protocols and then all of a sudden I can't advertise, I said, there's something fishy here.
It's so interesting. And to be clear, you've testified in front of Congress with a host of other doctors who experienced similar travesties, if you will. And I'll never forget that when this first started happening, my household caught it pretty early on. And the family doctor, who I have loved and respected forever, really big internist, also an endocrinologist, recommended hydroxychloroquine. And I was like, wait a minute. Because at the time I thought this was like quackery. And I'm thinking the world's literally best endocrinologist is, and I was like, okay. And I thought to myself, like, I didn't even, you know, I've trusted this woman with my life repeatedly, and for some reason, I didn't believe her. My wife took it, and I don't know what happened. I was actually brainwashed to not trust my own doctor, who's one of the most highly educated, one of the most highly respected, arguably the best endocrinologist on the planet. I didn't take it.
And that's what happened because it became political.
Okay.
Loss of trust happened.
Why do you think that's the case? And now that if I could back up for one second, one of the things that I'm looking at in my space of health and wellness, right? You have subject matters like this one that are not political. And when you've got emails being exposed in congressional hearings, NIH actively talking about secret back channels, how to avoid FOIA requests, how to get out of providing information to the public. That's not political. That's not Democrat. That's not Republican. It's deeply disturbing. What the F is going on?
And that's exactly what happened is basically so remember, I'm a Malibu physician, right? So I have a huge population that I treat in Malibu. And I've saved some of these patients, I've saved them from kidneys. You know, they had kidney cancer, expedited them to surgery quickly. They trusted me to have the surgery. They're still alive. You know, and these are like, you know, they trusted me with those moments. When you have cancer, they trusted me in how to manage their cancer. And here a virus comes along and basically nobody's listening.
What I did to my doctor.
You know what I mean? But it was, what do you mean? Especially in Malibu. Malibu is, you know, more towards the left side, right?
Yes, I understand.
So the fact that there was a politician on the right side talking about hydroxychloroquine, it's like everybody all of a sudden assumed that I was a right side.
MAGA.
Yeah,
Jill's on MAGA. I'm like, how? Wait, what?
Yeah, exactly. And it's like, first of all, I'm a Canadian, you know, coming to America. I mean, I'm an American now, but I mean, you know, I'm not really big into the whole politics. To me, it's really, you know, the person.
Yes, of course.
Like, vote for the person, not the party. And so, and what does the person stand for? So to me, that's exactly what happened. It was, you know, my patients in Malibu stopped trusting me with simple drugs. And here's even people that were on hydroxychloroquine for their arthritis before that. didn't trust it. And I said, you're on hydroxychloroquine already. Don't worry. You're going to be fine. But that anxiety, that, you remember you saw all these videos of people dying, of
Yes.
people,
Yes.
crashing in
Yes.
oxygen. By the way, I've been on the front line now for, 4 years because we're still not finished with COVID, sadly. I've yet to see those videos. I've yet to see a patient coming into my office, stopping to breathe and crash. I took care of patients that were low oxygen. In fact, I published on hypoxic patients treated at home.
Hypoxic patients meaning very low oxygen in the blood.
oxygen. So I pushed it. I mean, like, these people didn't want to go to the hospital. I'm not going to just let them die. So I said, you know what? Let's figure it out. Let me give you this. Let me give you that. Let me give you that. That's how I discovered the power of ivermectin, really.
Well, that's where we're
was
going
on the
right
front
now.
line.
Okay, so I'm guessing that the majority of people,
Yes.
when they think of ivermectin,
Horse paste.
and Joe
they
Rogan.
branded it.
Horse worming medication, Joe
Yes.
Rogan. And
Yes.
Joe Rogan got raked over the coals. Idiot, bad advice, moron, dumb shit, irresponsible. And it turns out he was
Joe
right.
Rogan was right. Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So, Doc, talk to me about ivermectin.
And actually, it's so funny because I'm friends with this manager of a lot of celebrities, and I was so mad when I saw, and he manages, I'm not going to say the name, but I would see some celebrities talking down on ivermectin and saying, "Oh my God, they're giving a horse paste." I was so mad because
They have
here
no
I
idea what
am.
they're talking about.
I'm treating patients. They have no idea what's going on. I was so mad. And so for me to stay up all night for a patient that was hypoxic and to hear a celebrity say, "Oh, ivermectin doesn't treat," I mean, I wanted to quit. I wanted to quit as a doctor because I said, what am I doing here? Why am I spending my time, evening, sacrificing my family time to save people if we're going to be listening to someone that's criticizing a drug that they have no clue what it is?
Yep.
And you could probably hear my frustration because that was...
Oh, I would be outraged.
I was
I
so
would be
mad. I was so
outraged.
mad.
And especially when lives are on the line. And the one thing that I will never forget is that a veterinarian who I happen to adore named Dr. Karen Becker, at the same time my dog had been put on Viagra. Just follow me here.
Wow.
And for a heart condition. And I was like, why are we giving my dog dick pills? And I was,
Yes.
Doc. And she's like, Jill, you're confused. She's like, there's no such thing as like human medicine and pet medicine. And she's like, ivermectin is not a horse. She's like, can we use it in animals? Yes. We also use it in people.
Yes.
And gave me like this all these different uses. And I remember thinking, as Rogan is being like publicly flogged.
Yes.
I was like, this is completely misinformed. This isn't true. No, I don't know if this stuff works or it doesn't work, but I certainly know it's not for horses. No. And so your frustration is beyond understandable. But what's really scary is when you found out how powerful it was to help with COVID. So let's talk about how you found that out.
And here's the thing. It's like I was on the front line, touching the patients, seeing the patients, exposed to the patients,
running a whole study, correct?
And my friends, my patients in Malibu, and this manager that I was talking about, I was so frustrated. So I'm like, could you tell your client to just
Shut up.
Exactly. I was so mad. I sent him the most, profane message ever. But I was like, I had enough. And then he said, well, at least Joe Rogan's on your side. And I said, thank God for Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
It was those people that were just...
By the way, you know how many people just clicked off because they've associated them with like hard right-wing lunatics? So like, oh, Rogan, that's where you get your courage, which is why I established all of the credentials before the conversation. And there's research. So you don't get to switch off if you don't like Joe Rogan because the data's there. The data that won a Monster Award?
Yeah, we've
so
had three.
You did a whole study on ivermectin, COVID, and bifidobacterium.
Yes.
Tell me what you found, Doc.
So I'm going to go back. Remember I said we found COVID in the stools?
Yes.
And then we looked at people that were high risk versus exposed versus
Yes.
people that had severe COVID. We discovered a bacteria called bifidobacteria. Why did I, out of the trillion bugs out there, zone in on bifidobacteria? Because it is the bacteria that is present in newborns. That's why your newborns are resilient at the beginning, right?
Human resident strain.
Yes.
Got
and
it.
then as we age, the process of aging is loss of this bifidobacteria. So I zoned in on bifidobacteria to say, okay, well, what is it doing in severe patients? What is it doing in high risk exposed? We looked at the data and basically 43 severe patients had 0 bifidobacteria. But it wasn't only bifidobacteria, it was almost like a signature microbiome, right? So loss of bifidobacteria, loss of Faecalibacterium prausnitzii, loss, and I say Faecalibacterium
So there's a
prausnitzii.
theme in the microbiome for people with severe cases.
Correct.
Got it.
High bacteroides, loss of diversity. So we said, you know what? That may be the high-risk population on a microbiome picture.
Okay.
Then we looked at the high-risk exposed. They had the flip equation. Low bacteroides, high FAS, high bifidobacteria, and high diversity. So we said, well, that gives us something to look at. Why don't we start looking at how do we increase the bifidobacteria in this population? So remember, I was the guinea pig on the pandemic, right? And so I took all these drugs. I took hydroxy, I saw what it did to my microbiome. I took vitamin C, I saw what it did to my microbiome. What was fascinating was at the beginning of the pandemic, I was paranoid of catching COVID. So I was like taking 10,000 milligrams of vitamin C. I don't recommend 10,000 milligrams to anyone, but I took it for a week because I was, people were coughing on me and they were sick.
Of course.
And I'm like, my best defense
Yeah.
is vitamin C, because that's what I always knew, right?
But say why vitamin C, because you explained it to me, because it increases.
So we did the studies. So what happens is I tested my stools after 1 week of taking vitamin C. And my scientist like, did you see what your bifidobacteria did? And they quadrupled. So I said...
Hence the mechanism
hence
of
the
vitamin C fighting viral infections.
Exactly.
So it's not just a wives' tale from your great-grandmother.
Correct.
Son of a bitch.
But the pure vitamin C, not vitamin C that you contaminate with other products. So the problem is the majority of vitamins out there have a lot of
junk
other
fillers
junk.
and the stuff you told me, silicon dioxide.
Yes.
And, oh my God.
Yes, yes. So when you put all these fillers, you're removing the benefit of the vitamin C, right?
Right.
And unfortunately, even our foods now, we wouldn't need vitamin C if the orange was pure. But when the soil is messed up, the orange is messed up, you don't have the same nutrients. So that's a whole big different topic there. But essentially what happened was when I saw vitamin C, and this is how I function, when I see an N of 1, I move to an N of 20. So right away, I said, I'm going to start testing patients before and after vitamin C. So I started calling I'm with a bunch of groups of doctors all over, and we have an email blast where we reach a lot of doctors. So we basically said, look, we're looking at vitamin C. If you're giving your patient, if you're not changing anything in your patient's protocol diet, and you're not giving them antibiotics or anything else, and you're just giving vitamin C before and after, we want to look at their microbiome. And then basically what happened was we noticed the bifidobacteria went up in all those patients.
And the severity of COVID went down.
Well, no, that's just in those patients. So we published on that. Because science is a story that needs to be told. So the first thing was, let's show how vitamin C works. First, let's show the virus in the stools. Then let's show how do you survive the virus?
Got it.
So we show bifidobacteria. Then let's show how do we increase the bifidobacteria.
Understood.
So that was one.
I'm following you.
Number 2, vitamin D increases bifidobacteria. We haven't published on it yet, but we're going to be publishing. I'm just leaking it right now. And then number 3, what happened was when I started to look at ivermectin, and I started that protocol because hydroxychloroquine was so politicized, we couldn't enroll anymore. Interference with research happened. We only enrolled like about 200 patients out of 600. And so this study with hydroxychloroquine could not be done. So then we switched gears in July to ivermectin doxycycline.
July of
2020.
Thank you.
So August 2020, we got approved to run the ivermectin doxycycline protocol. It was probably a little bit after that Joe Rogan started talking. And what happens is I part of a group. I was part of a group during the pandemic. We were about 300 doctors treating. So we would send each other. You know, it's like if you.
I'm seeing this. Are you seeing that?
And also,
a
like,
think tank, if
send
you will.
me. You know, like it's hard to go through the data on a day by day and take care of patients. So we had each other, we were sending each other articles.
Right,
Like,
of
hey, did
course.
you see this? Not just the articles that are published by pharma, but all the articles, the preprints.
Globally,
Yeah.
in Europe,
And saying,
in Asia.
hey, did you see this paper? Did you see this paper? So we started collaborating. So we went through the hydroxychloroquine, Z-Pak, vitamin C, D protocol, that whole group. And then when we switched gears, with ivermectin, I kept saying, okay, don't say a word. Just keep it quiet. Treat your patients. We don't want it to go out there and then be killed again. So why ivermectin? Ivermectin is a fermented product of a bacteria that is in the same category as bifidobacteria. And so when I was studying ivermectin and writing the protocol to run the trial with the FDA, I said, let me study ivermectin. What is it? So right away I'm Googling and I'm looking up the data, the phylum. Phylum is like groups of microbes that share one thing in common.
Okay.
And right away I traced back the microbe that secretes this fermentation to the phylum, the same phylum that bifidobacteria is in. So I said, I wonder if ivermectin, being the fermentation of a bacteria, is feeding bifidobacteria. And why did I ask that question? Because interestingly enough, and why I went the ivermectin route, I had a patient that was on my hydroxychloroquine protocol. I didn't know if he was, getting the placebo or the real stuff. His oxygen started dropping. That was the hard thing about doing these trials, taking care of these hundreds of patients, not knowing whether they were getting a sugar pill for the hydroxy or not.
Oh, so you don't have a bias. You can't know.
And also when they crashed, I couldn't give them more hydroxy. In fact, let me tell you what happened. We had 19 patients enrolled, and then one of my Malibu patients gets COVID. I put him on the trial, and he crashes. And now I'm stuck. All I have in my hands, I don't have ivermectin. It's 7:00 in the morning. I didn't know, I wasn't comfortable at that point. This was 2020, like April 2020 or May or something like that, 2020. I wasn't really comfortable with this guy not, having I didn't have ivermectin on hand. I just had hydroxychloroquine, but I didn't want to overdose him. And so I called the pharma. I unblinded myself for those 19 patients, which means those 19 patients, we had to call the FDA and say, by the way, I have to unblind myself.
Right, which is in trial when you see like double blind, meaning the patients don't know and the doctor doesn't know. That's what double blind. And that's what we really want a double blind placebo control trial. And those are considered the most ideal because nobody can insert an unconscious bias. But in this case, lives are on the line.
Lives are on the line, and I didn't want anybody dying on my shift, and so I lost those 19 patients that we had done. We had to restart all over again, redo all the packaging, redo all the placebo control.
Wow.
Turns out the guy was on the placebo. So at 7 a.m., I brought him the hydroxychloroquine and the Z-Pak and vitamin C, D, and zinc, and he was fine. So when I figured out that we could do ivermectin, doxycycline, I said, well, you know what? If the patient crashes, I'm going to just go the vitamin C, vitamin D, zinc, ivermectin, doxycycline route. This way, I don't have to unblind myself, and I can still treat the patient, right? So we were writing the protocol with the FDA on ivermectin, doxycycline to get approved. Sometime in June, I think like May or June, one guy basically crashes on my protocol of hydroxy, Z-Pak, vitamin C. So he's heading to the hospital. And I said, go pick up, did you get the ivermectin, by the way, as a backup? He had like 36 milligrams of ivermectin. I go, why don't you stop by McDonald's? I know, like the worst crappy food, but it's fatty. It was French fries. I was thinking I needed fat right away. So it was like a pizza.
Because the fat has something to do with
it absorbs the ivermectin.
Understood, like a fat soluble vitamin.
So
got it. Okay.
I was like, why don't you stop by McDonald's, get some French fries, and eat
this is the best endorsement.
I know. I don't want to endorse. No.
Okay.
But whatever. I basically sent him he took it, and then by the time his oxygen was in the 70s,
Oh, geez.
he got to the
Oh, my
hospital.
God.
His oxygen was at 92%.
Come on, Doc.
So the
How?
doctor said, whatever that doctor is doing with you, just follow her and get out of the hospital.
Oh, my
So
God.
from there, I said, why is it doing that? And that's when I kind of like asked myself, maybe ivermectin is feeding the bifidobacteria and increasing the bifidobacteria at the time you need it.
That quickly?
To remove the cytokines. Well, it all happens in the gut. So remember, you have cytokines in your lungs, you have cytokines in the gut.
Cytokines are inflammatory proteins.
Yes.
And this is when we were hearing on the news about these
Yes.
cytokine storms,
Yes.
where it wasn't the virus that was killing
Correct.
you, it was your own immune response to the virus, this overactive inflammatory
Correct.
response. Got it. So
as a physician on the front line, your first thing is when a patient crashes, it means he's got a lot of cytokines. He's basically in an anaphylactic reaction.
Oh, I thought it was like your lungs were
No, it's
filled with
basically,
some sort of...
it's filled with cytokines. It's filled with inflammation. So the first thing you got to do is shut off the inflammation. It's like fire in your lungs, fire in your gut. You got to shut down the fire. You got to turn it off. So,
Doc, I'm so sorry to interrupt you. Is this why some people were suggesting prednisone packs?
yeah, prednisone is a decreased inflammation as well. So
Got
you
it.
got to
Okay,
you got to decrease
understood.
the inflammation.
Okay, I'm with you.
So in my mind, I said, well, if ivermectin is feeding the bifidobacteria are increasing, they're therefore taking the cytokines that are in the gut, flushing them out, getting, diarrhea, going into the septic, right? And then the ones of the lungs now circulate back to the gut, and therefore you can breathe again because you've removed the inflammation. Because
Wow.
people think, well, inflammation occurs in the gut. Infection occurs in the gut. In the lungs. But it's a gut-lung, there is a gut-lung pathway.
Connection.
If you
Okay.
treat the gut, you can possibly treat lung disorders. There's been data on actually bifidobacteria with asthma. We quote it on our papers where you can fix, if you fix the gut, you fix the asthma, you can fix the lung problem. So there is a gut-lung access. Why? Because blood circulates. Blood circulates from the brain to the gut, from the lungs to the gut, from the liver to the gut. Everything circulates back to your colon. And so people
Okay.
don't think, when you're putting something in your eye, you're putting something in your skin, that stuff is absorbing in your blood vessels, traveling and ending up in your gut.
So here's where this goes.
Yes.
So our patient goes to McDonald's,
Yes.
takes ivermectin, and you're thinking that it's this guy, but it's not just this guy. This turns into an award-winning paper.
It started off with, it started off with ivermectin increases bifidobacteria. Then we wrote a hypothesis.
Okay.
The hypothesis
Okay.
was the most read hypothesis during the pandemic was retracted. So then I did
But
the
wasn't
study.
it like out of 1,000, or they made you retract it, then you did the study?
We did
'Cause it was like-
that. I knew the hypothesis. I knew the study.
Okay.
And I published the hypothesis first.
Got it.
before the
Understood.
study.
Okay,
so I knew my
everyone, the
hypothesis was right.
is circulating, and someone made you retract it. Who
The
made you retract
the
it?
journal retracted it
Why?
because we quoted in there that ivermectin worked for COVID, and those papers were retracted.
Why?
But when
Based on what?
there's so many. There's a whole. I'm not even going to venture to guess what, but I think. Unfortunately, the journals are captured, and unfortunately, any way to remove a paper these days, you realize there's been over 20,000 medical papers retracted from the medical literature. You can't retract science. Science is about prove me wrong, prove me right,
Well, that's
prove
what I was
me
going
right.
to say. Did they prove
me
you wrong?
No, nobody proved me wrong. They removed the hypothesis. When you remove a hypothesis, you've removed science, because if you cannot make a hypothesis, it's not science.
So now we make the hypothesis, they make you retract it, you do the study.
So I published the study, I submitted to the American College of Gastro, and basically from there, where I won the award was my work on the vaccines. Because while this interference, and you could imagine how I felt on the pandemic, because at this point, I'm like, I am gonna look into this vaccine. I'm not gonna support it. I'm gonna look into what it's doing to the microbiome. So I took my colleagues that were at home quarantined at the same time as I'm running the clinical trial on the hydroxy, the clinical trial on the ivermectin. I took my colleagues and I said, I want your stools before and after. I want your stools before and then a month after the vaccine.
The vaccine.
And
But the study, just so I'm not getting it, the study on ivermectin did get published, though.
it didn't. The hypothesis
Just the
got
hypothesis.
just the hypothesis,
And then they retracted it. Got it.
And the study itself got published, but as an abstract in the American College of Gastro, because that's the only way you can publish.
Because I read it.
Yeah.
Yep, got it. And you
Yeah.
can read it now.
Yes,
and I can link
yes,
to it.
yes,
Got it. And it
yes.
shows the connection between ivermectin and bifidobacterium.
Yes,
Now,
100%.
thank you, Doc.
Yes.
Now we're on to you begin researching the vaccine.
Yes.
So you want to understand what the vaccine is doing in the body.
Right.
Got it.
Because it's supposed to mimic, a piece of the virus. It's supposed to
Match.
increase immunity somehow, right? Or stimulate immunity. If we go by the belief that immunity is in your gut and bifidobacteria seems to be showing that it is a very important microbe in immunity, there's tons of data out there, then what is the vaccine doing to the bifidobacteria? So the first thing we saw was day one, patients gave me, I had a baseline of their stools. And then a month later, the bifidobacteria went down in all the patients except one patient. And we didn't figure out why, what changed, etc. What was concerning, and what's even more concerning now, and we can't publish that, is the persistence of that killing of the bifidobacteria.
Meaning, I got the vaccine 1 and 2, right?
Yes.
And I've spoken to numerous people. They're like, you're healthy. We're not doing clinical trials on the boosters, or they're not doing clinical trials on the boosters. You don't need the booster. And in looking at the landscape, for me personally, I was like, okay, well, I can still get COVID.
Sure.
So, all right, I know I can survive COVID. Me getting the vaccine to protect my mom isn't going to work because I still got COVID. So I guess I don't need the shot. I'm personally not going to get it, and I'm not helping anybody else by getting it.
Right.
That said, I only got 2. You're telling me that the 1 and the 2, right?
Yes,
No
the 1
boosters.
and the 2. That's all. That's what we studied
That's
initially.
all we need. We don't need boosters for it to continue
so
negatively impacting the bifidobacterium colony in our gut.
So what happened was we noticed with booster 1, the bifidobacteria dropped, and then booster 2, the second shot, the bifidobacteria kept dropping. Okay, now the majority of these people, because we're following all this, so I'm not going to really discuss, the research, but essentially just to appease everyone, the majority of people are fine, right? You see it, you see people that got vaccinated, nothing happened to them, they're fine.
I feel fine.
You feel fine.
Which is
You're
part
fine.
of the reason that I'm very wary of the whole vaccine calamity, and I'm afraid to scare people off of necessary vaccines that could save if someone's life, right?
100%.
Okay.
So the majority of people, 1 or 2 shots, they're going to bounce back and their bifido's going to come back up and their microbiome is going to come back up, okay? However, there is a population that it's not coming back up.
Right, these are these vax injuries.
These are the vax injuries. And what we've noticed with the vax injuries, and by the way, how did I look into this to begin with, was I started looking at, a physician friend of mine who basically got injured and could stop practicing. She was a gastroenterologist in Beverly Hills, got vaccinated, and all of a sudden she's debilitated, cannot work, nothing. So I looked at her microbiome.
Can I pause you for 1 second? Doc, if you are familiar with this, can you highlight a few, what does a vaccine injury look like? And, there's a big influencer. Her name's Dr. Rhonda Patrick, PhD. She's one of the people that's on Rogan regularly. Yeah. I was talking to another influencer in fitness in my line of work, and he's like, oh, I had her on, and people were really mad. I'm like, how? Everyone loves her. She's a genius. He's like, because she said that she had a vax injury.
Yeah, the fact that you can't even talk about it, the fact that you can't even acknowledge it, that's a problem already, right?
What do these look like, these vax injuries?
So
I hear like
range,
my period's
right?
messed up, I can't get pregnant.
Yeah, so let me go back. Remember, I've done almost 3 decades of clinical trials, over 300 clinical trials in pharmaceutical companies. And I've done vaccine studies. I mean, I brought vaccines to the market, right? For the flu, for et cetera.
But this is a different
Yeah,
tech?
this is a different technology
Okay.
of vaccine, okay? But here's the principle of doing clinical trials. The principle of doing clinical trials is basically you are testing the safety of the drug that you're giving. So in other words, I have a patient, I'm giving him drug X, and then he gets symptoms. I have to record this as possibly from the drug. That's called an adverse event.
Ah, yes,
Okay.
of course.
And then
I got it.
if and up to a month, up to a year, you have to monitor, right? Because this is a new compound that you've put into somebody's body. When the complication is whether, and that's something the FDA looks very carefully at. If a physician doesn't record serious adverse event, which means the drug caused a person to go to the hospital, the drug caused a heart attack, the drug caused lymphoma. Now, it doesn't mean that the drug caused the lymphoma or the heart attack,
But it occurred whilst
but it
on
was
the drug.
occurred within that 1 month time.
Understood.
So if a person dies from a drug, doesn't have to be the vaccine, it could be any drug. Our first job as a physician on the line of clinical trials is to call the FDA and say, by the way, patient died. That's a serious adverse event. And
Understood.
you have to report this. So when patients are dying shortly after the vaccine, to me, that's a serious adverse event because that's what I was taught. That's ICH GCP guidelines for doing clinical trials. Remember, I've done clinical trials for pharma. That's how
For
we
30
do it.
years.
Yeah.
Understood.
So basically, if all of a sudden this new technology of vaccine comes on and we are not allowed to call this a serious adverse event, there's a problem, right? If we're making fun of the people that are or saying, oh, they're crazy because they said they're vax injured, there's a problem there. Because the number one thing as a physician is to listen to your patient. And if the patient says, doctor, I was fine, and then after the vaccine, this happened to me. I'll give you an example. I was giving a discussion in a farm, and this government person who will stay nameless, he was all pro-vaccine, etc. He listened to my talk on the loss of bifidobacteria, and he came to my talk after and said, you just made me realize my digestive issues, I didn't have them before the vaccine, but most likely something happened in my gut that created this, right? So intuitively, he figured it out. Now, so he didn't figure it out before because he was like, well, I'm starting to have these digestive problems, etc. But when you explain to people that it kills your good microbes and you start having digestive problems, you put two and two together and you start saying, maybe that's what happened, right? So, because this guy was perfectly fine before.
Wow.
So what does a vaccine injured look like? Or a person that has an adverse event or serious adverse event?
Right.
That's how we're going to call it rather than calling it vaccine injured.
Mm-hmm.
It's anywhere that's different from what you were before.
Understood.
So,
inexplicably.
Exactly. So you lost hair. You had hair before. Why are you losing hair?
Heart issues.
Heart issues, arrhythmia, digestive issues, diarrhea. I have a lot of patients that have diarrhea, and it's very difficult to fix. So what's going on? Have they trashed their gut? Then there's the gut-brain axis, the neurological. That's what made us pay attention, me and my neurologist colleagues, in Beverly Hills, because what happened was, one of my colleagues was calling me and he said, I'm seeing a lot of CMV encephalitis and herpes encephalitis. And of course, none of those doctors wanted to talk about it.
What's
because
CMV encephalitis?
It's a virus,
Got
basically.
it. But
so
herpes, wouldn't you get that from having sex with somebody? What does that do with the vaccine?
But why is the herpes all of a sudden
acting up,
going to the brain?
Oh, it's going to the brain
and causing an encephalitis.
Oh, that's what you're.
That's what I'm
sorry,
talking
Doc.
about.
I didn't understand what herpes encephalitis was. Hold on. Drop my mints.
Yeah.
Go.
So when a patient is basically, having a virus, and then that virus becomes all the way to the brain, then that's a problem. That means he's immunosuppressed.
Herpes in your brain.
Yes, CMV. I mean, so those were the cases we were seeing.
That's really
And here's
scary
the other
stuff.
things that we were seeing.
Yep.
We were seeing new onset Parkinson's. new onset Alzheimer's. Remember I told you at the beginning, I'm doing the microbiome studies
Yes.
on, and we're seeing something in Parkinson's, something
Yes.
in Alzheimer's. So my why
Years ago.
gastroenterology? I did a
Yes.
case
Yes,
where I did
remember.
fecal transplant on a patient with Alzheimer's, and he could remember his daughter's date of birth 6 months after the procedure. So when I changed his microbiome, his poop in his colon, and gave him his wife's microbiome, who was super with it,
Robust, yeah.
he started remembering things. So when we start looking, and we're actually publishing stuff at ACG, because the deadline's today actually to publish for
ACG,
the
American College of Gastroenterology.
So we have 6 abstracts coming up. And so we're showing the data on Alzheimer's, autism, long haulers. So we can't say vaccine injured because then it's not going to be, it's too controversial. So we have to stay within but here's the problem. It should not be controversial. In order to advance science, in order to advance medicine, we need to be, better. We need to be better at listening to our patients. We need to be more humble to say, you know what? Maybe there's a possibility that this is happening to these patients, right? So, I started looking into this, with autism because of my work with autism and children. Moms are not crazy. They raise their babies, they see their kids, they know their kids better than anyone. So when a mom tells you something, you kind of have to listen. When a patient takes a new technology of a vaccine and then all of a sudden tells you, hey, doc, I wasn't like this before, you have to pay attention.
Doc, here's what, and let me, okay, so I want to back up for one more second on this vaccine.
Yeah.
We got a call to the podcast when it just came out, and it was this group of doctors who'd worked on the vaccine, and they're like, we're just educating people about the vaccine, not to be afraid of the vaccine. And I was like, great.
Right.
Awesome. And I had one of these doctors on,
Right.
and she's like, don't you understand? This tech has been around for 30 years.
Right.
All it is, and I can't recall, sorry, but it's like, all the old tech is like this cold virus or something, and the new tech is way better, and all it is this, and it's out of your body within 24 hours. And because my wife is at home, and she's like, I don't want it. I'm like, you gotta get it. We can't go here, we can't go there. At this point, we're still living in California.
Right.
I'm like, we can't go to dinner, got to show a vaccine, like we're not gonna be able to work. I can't get into a studio. Like, we gotta do it. Gotta do it, babe.
Right.
It's ridiculous. I just did a whole interview on it. And then all of a sudden, every day in the headline, mRNA is different. mRNA is scary. Vax injury, this, that. And now I'm just thinking, I wish I hadn't done that podcast because I have no fucking idea what the heck we put out there. What is this technology?
Yeah, and
Is it
that's-
safe?
I don't.
We don't know.
We don't know. I mean, it's
don't
still
know.
in research. It's still like,
After 30 years?
but it hasn't come out till COVID. And here's the thing: when you look, here's my concern, right? And this was kind of a hypothesis that I put out there. What if the spike protein activates? What if it activates a virus? What if that's the way that it triggered the herpes encephalitis or the CMV encephalitis? So here's the thing that really also bothered me during the pandemic were the lies of, I took a shot and it's supposed to stay in the deltoid. Nothing stays in the deltoid. The deltoid's not this little, capsule where you basically, put a vaccine and it's going to suddenly stay in this capsule. No, the deltoid is linked with nerves, with blood vessels. So as soon as you put something in the muscle, it goes to the blood vessels, ends up in your colon. Your colon is the motherboard of all these microbes. What does it do, this floating messenger RNA, to the microbiome, and what does it do to the individual microbes, right?
Yeah.
So that's why I don't think, the studies were done poorly on it, human studies for this. And to me, I don't have a problem with a messenger RNA technology for cancer, right? Because cancer patients
We're in trouble. This is the same thing you guys all say.
They're dying. They should try
benefit analysis.
100%.
Cancer, you should have morphine. No cancer, no fine. Like, and you guys
Right.
are, okay, this will kill you if you catch it. Like, MRSA? Yeah, we should give you Cipro. A Z-Pack for a viral infection?
Exactly.
Probably not.
Correct.
Like, it's just, and everyone thinks, like, I said in an interview, after looking into this whole like children's vaccine schedule, which by the way, I vaxxed the shit out of my kids. And like and my ex was like, "Ugh," and I was like, stop it. Don't be stop. And now they're like, this vaccine schedule for kids is ridiculous. Like 70 vaccines in 5 seconds. And then all of a sudden, the minute you're like, I don't know that a baby needs hepatitis B.
Right.
She's anti-vax.
Right.
Like,
And that's the narrative going against you. That's the narrative they're trying to do to push the marketing of all this, right?
Right.
So
Right.
unfortunately, but you have to be vigilant as a consumer, and you have to say, what am I being sold here? Right? I'm being sold fear so that I can go panic and get this shot right away. I'm being sold fear so I can buy this $20 mask, right? I'm being sold fear so I can take these drugs, right? So I can buy these drugs. I mean, on every side, whether you look at it, whether with the hydroxy, the mask, the vitamins, everything is functioning with fear and controversy. Controversy sells, marketing 101, right? So if you stop the controversy and you think for yourself quietly, peacefully, and you go, okay, well, I'm relatively healthy.
Let people do that. I mean,
No,
now
we don't
do
let
it quietly.
we don't let people choose the route that they want to choose, and we don't give informed consent. If I give you an informed consent and I basically say, okay, I'm going to give you this drug.
Yeah.
Here are your risks. We don't know this, and that.
Right.
But we know this, and that. Then you're able to look at the data and say, okay, you know what? I'm going to take my chances.
Right.
And I'm going to do that. But and here's where, on both sides, you were telling me before with hydroxychloroquine, your gut told you not to take it.
Well, part of it though, it was the idiots are doing this.
Yeah. Well,
And that
because
it
you
was
didn't want to
that-
be, yes.
And I thought, like, how is my doctor,
Right.
my brilliant, genius, best of the best doctor, drinking the Kool-Aid on this? And
Right.
now I know that she was looking.
She was reading. She was looking, yes.
Yeah, and talking to
Doctors on the front line.
Yes.
That were seeing, touching the patient.
and talking to even Elon Musk is like, I called China and said, what are you guys doing? And I
Yes.
told them right away here, stop using the ventilators. It's going to kill people. But
Yes.
nobody listened. And now he's like a right-wing weirdo.
Right.
And it's bizarre.
And
It's just people are not allowed. That's the scariest thing for me is that even now, you and I have this conversation. We're like, well, we're going to become anti-vaxxers, right-wing weirdos, tin hat lunatics. And that's why I'm like, can you just tell people what a genius you are and how credentialed you are and how
I
people
think-
bow down at your feet in your field and how you've been doing this for 30 years? And so it's like we cannot do that.
I think it's more than the credibility. I think it's the understanding that you cannot interfere with research. Interference with research happened, and that affects all of us. And we have to start trusting those people that were on the front line. Because unfortunately, what I saw this pandemic were the doctors that were not touching the patients, not treating, reading the papers, were the ones talking and influencing the public, but they didn't have the guts themselves to go on the front line. If it's one thing, if you're treating patients, I learned so much on the front line of COVID.
I've seen this in all the congressional hearings.
And
doctors go on the front line saying this.
Yeah, and you know what? But the fact is, I can't even discuss it because of this whole narrative. But at some point, the head of pharma is going to become a patient. At some point, the politician is going to be a patient. At some point, him or his kids. So interference with research and medicine is a big no-no. When I saw the treatment was working, remember I was on the front line, so first of all, I was fine. And second of all, I was one patient, two patients. My first couple patients were really sick. Like one guy had COPD, CHF, had a bypass 2 weeks prior.
Wow.
I mean, really sick, dying, okay? And he got COVID. And he had kidney problems and diabetic. I mean, the worst of the worst. And he was the father of a friend of mine. So you can't get into any more stress. So I was so scared of giving him hydroxychloroquine because I had just started the protocol, right? That I said, why don't you just lick it? Okay. And I go, why don't you take, yeah, I'm like, just lick it. Okay. And then I gave him, a Z-Pack and I treated him early. And then I did all the other stuff, like he elevated him because he was overweight. I didn't want him having reflux and therefore aspirating on top of that. I treated the gut. I treated the lungs. I basically gave everything. And this guy survived. That was even before my protocol was out. This was the beginning. So I said, that was the first thing that gave me confidence, because then I said, well, you know what? This guy survived. I'm going to be fine, here. Right?
Yeah.
So that's basically what happened. Was I was like, I gained confidence from treating my patients. And as I was gaining confidence treating my patients one by one and seeing the miracles in a way of them surviving, and then treating these hypoxic patients, we're talking about the chief of the hospital. I actually called a journalist from Ventura to record this guy after I treated him. He was the chief officer of the hospital, chief medical officer of my hospital. And he didn't want to go to the hospital. He was at home being treated. And all the doctors, I had about a dozen doctors call me, are you crazy? You're treating this guy at home. He should be in the hospital. The problem is the week before, a doctor died in the hospital in the intensive care unit. So this guy was kind of scared of going there, right? And he said, you know what, Sabine, I trust you. You know what you're doing. Save me and my wife. Well, I saved him and his wife. Wow. They survived. So when they survived, then I called the journalist from VC Reporter, because I said, I want you to interview this doctor because he's the chief medical officer of the hospital, and this way, or medical director of the hospital, and this way,
it gains credibility.
He gives credibility to people to start trusting and at least bring people to me to get treated, because I couldn't advertise for my clinical trials.
This is insane.
This
is insanity.
So it was public, and a friend of mine, my neighbor said to me, if I had the treatment for COVID, I would be screaming it from the top of the roofs. And I said, well, I tried. I tried screaming it from the top of the roofs. Like, no one died on my shift. Do you know what that means? I'm doing clinical trials with the FDA watching me on placebo-controlled drugs, and no one died. Not one of those patients that entered the clinical trials died. What does that tell you? So what happened to me was an eye-opening to the fact that I really need to be diligent as a consumer. I really need to be diligent as a doctor. I really need to do my own research because I can't trust what's out there. And I really need to not fear and really kind of like calm down, because whatever will happen, will happen. So if you're having fear on top of that, that's not really going to help your situation. It's like being in a canoe, and the canoe is kind of like, there's the water coming into the canoe and you're panicking, and now you're adding more water in the canoe, you're going to sink. But if you calm down and say, okay, let me just, paddle all the way to shore calmly, I'm going to be fine. That's how people have to be.
Doc, the biggest issue by far, or not the biggest issue, but one of the most alarming that persists,
yes,
is the silencing and the lying.
Yes.
And it's obviously deep, right? It's like the origins of COVID. We buried the lab leak hypothesis, and now the FBI, the Department of Energy, Francis Collins. It's like, oh, well, probably. Okay. And it comes from gain-of-function research. Maybe.
Yeah.
Okay. And if you talked about these things, you were a kook, a quack, you were silenced, you were removed, then doctors saying, hey, we need to try this protocol. Hey, ivermectin has a side effect profile next to none and potentially really helpful, silenced. Abstracts, removed. The NIH, the emails say everything that you could ever possibly need to know. You read the emails where Fauci's senior advisor is like back channel, hide it, giving away grants and asking for kickbacks to Eco Health Alliance that is responsible for this whole thing in August 2020 after knowing they created it, and then giving them another almost $8 million and saying, where's my kickback? So much money. Do you get it all? I almost died. Why is this happening? Like, I know you can't possibly know, like I can't possibly know. What do you think?
Well, there's
like, why are we silencing doctors? Why are we lying about all this stuff? Is there what is this axis of evil? And I get that now we're getting into all kinds of weird conspiracy theories.
No,
but I'm just curious.
I think here's the thing, right? I think people get comfortable in their making certain amount of money, doing, buying stocks, exchanging, etc. And so they feel comfortable in that lifestyle. They feel comfortable with the whole pharma, guiding our health and directing our health. And they don't realize that the dangers of having that control. In other words, a pharmaceutical company being so powerful to tell you what drug to take. Why am I on this path here? Because, like I said earlier, the pharmaceutical companies are going to be the patients. The doctors are going to be the patients.
It's the you're telling me
So
that we are
you have
protecting
to
the
look.
status quo.
We're protecting the comfort zone that everybody's in.
So it's not like
the
some
comfort
evil kind of like
No, it's the comfort
take over the world,
No.
microchip your blood kind of thing.
No. It's the comfort zone of doctors saying, you know what, I feel more comfortable giving you a vaccine because the government is telling me to give you the vaccine. And therefore, I'm not going to get sued. I'm not going to go outside those guidelines. Remember, medicine is made of guidelines.
And
you have
silos.
reflux, you do this, and that. I'm not going to go outside the box because it's too dangerous. I could get sued. I could have the government after me. So again, functioning by fear.
I understand what you're saying.
So if you say,
Now
you know what, I'm going to step out of the box. Because that's what I did. I stepped out of the box. I'm completely here. I'm looking at fecal material for helping diseases, okay? What does that tell you? That tells you there's something we don't know that we need to start looking at. This is the new frontier.
I got it.
Here's the other problem. When you start looking at this something there, you start realizing, wait a minute, what we're doing with our food supply is damaging the something there. What we're doing with all these meds is damaging the something there. So how do we not damage the something there and still keep a business, right? How do we, as a pharmaceutical company, survive? Because we know, let's just go back to cancer. We know chemo drugs kill the gut and eventually kill people, right? Nobody's survived cancer, right? I mean, those cancers like, that are terminal cancers.
Pancreatic
cancer, stage 4, brain. Nobody survived that, okay? So if there is something that the chemo drug can help by blasting the tumor, and then something else that I can do in the gut to optimize the gut,
their ability to tolerate
then
the
you
chemo.
could bring both together.
Right.
And so my interest is not to go after pharma and say, because I've worked with pharma for 30 years. When I was doing clinical trials for pharma, I was doing these trials with the intent of helping people. And we've helped people. When a Crohn's patient comes in,
there are
having
drugs that
rectal
work
bleed
miracles.
and biologics are helping. Amazing.
Balance.
But then what about when the biologic doesn't work? Then you have to look here, right? Or what about the patient that cannot afford the biologics? Then you got to look here. So we cannot stop the innovation because it destroys the price of the stock. But at the same time, we cannot suppress the innovation because the innovation is not going to innovate anymore. If they feel that they're threatened, if they feel that they're, censored, if they feel like they can't publish. Look at all these papers I've published. It was thousands and thousands of dollars. People have no idea that hypothesis that was retracted was $3,000 just of paying the journal. My husband and I were joking the other day. We're like, this whole medical field needs to be relooked at because here we are paying to publish our data, our research. And on top of that, when we review these journals, we don't get paid. So can you imagine an industry where you have to discover, you have to find the money to do the research to discover.
I thought it was all grants from pharma.
Yeah, but then the grants from pharma have something behind it. It's not independent.
Of course.
And then if they don't like it,
my
they could say,
gosh, I
oh,
understand.
sorry, we're not publishing that. Cut the corner.
We didn't like what you found.
That's it. So at some point, we have to, as physicians and humans,
So these independent reviews are self-financed?
yes. So the independent
That's what it
reviews,
means when
the
it says
peer reviews,
independent?
it's nobody pays you. So I review articles all the time. We don't get paid for that. We do it on our own.
Okay.
So somebody that's not getting paid has to be motivated to do this. And so are they paid under the radar with nobody seeing? Who knows?
Understood.
So,
But we're preaching tolerance, we're preaching innovation,
yes.
we're preaching open dialogue,
Yes.
we're preaching lack of judgment, we're preaching proactivity and your own wellness.
Yes.
Doc, you are forever brilliant. I can't thank you enough for stepping outside the box and for being brave enough to have these conversations. I'm going to link to all of it, including your testimony in front of Congress. Where can we go to get more, to educate ourselves?
So Progenibiome is the lab that I created, which is a genetic sequencing lab to analyze the microbiome. Everything, we created a nonprofit microbiome research foundation to support the research, all this research that's being done.
Got it.
The patients I saved during the pandemic were generous enough to keep saving, because I'm a big believer in you help someone and then they help someone else, right? So that's the way humanity needs to function. I'm helping you and then you're helping me, and then we work together as a community, right? So I think we need to kind of have that more of a community and world together, because there's so much to learn on the microbiome. This is a new frontier. When you start looking at the whole global picture of the microbiome, you start seeing that humanity is really beautiful because of its diversity. You look at India, how they are, their foods. That's beautiful, and that's their microbiome. You look at Mexico, you look at Italy, you look at Russia. We have so much to learn from each other, and we're all different. We're all beautiful, and we all have different traits that we can add, kind of like the microbiome, really. A healthy microbiome is diverse, and each microbe is helping the other microbe to do something, to digest sugar, to digest dairy. You need that microbe to help that function of the cell, right? So this is what humanity needs to be. They need to come together and realize that, wars and all that is just destructive. It's destructive to the planet, destructive on the microbiome. We need to come together. There's so much to learn, because we come with microbes and we die. These microbes take over our bodies and put us back into the ground. So wouldn't it be interesting to know what these microbes are doing while we're alive to, live a little bit longer?
Optimize our wellness.
Yes.
I love you. You're fantastic.
Thank you.
Thanks, Doc.
Keeping it real with Jillian Michaels.